Well, good evening once again, and welcome to Insight Live. And my beautiful wife is joining me. Melanie, would you like to say hello?
Yes, I would like to say hello.
Okay.
Hi, welcome to Insight Live Tuesday night. We're very excited to be with you. We are live and interactive this evening, and we are looking forward to you interacting with this subject. Kurt, would you like to introduce it?
Well, I want us to imagine something, okay? Imagine you are battling infertility. You move halfway around the world. You left a very successful career and now it's gone. You suddenly have to reinvent yourself and you're almost like unable to reconcile the life you once lived with the life you lived before. And you're questioning your identity. Is your identity in your work? What's happening with you? What is God doing in your life? And when you're in that kind of situation, what do? You go on a pilgrimage. And that's what we're going to talk about, going on pilgrimage/retreat. And Melanie just asked me, have we been on a pilgrimage? And I kind of get confused between, well, what is a retreat and a pilgrimage? And then we're going to talk about sabbatical. We're going to talk about like mini pilgrimages. Like, for example, yesterday we took an hour and a half, 2-hour walk. And for me, that was like a pilgrimage. It was just seeing, it did so much for me. It was a 2-hour walk, but we just saw these beautiful streams and trees, and I just fell in love with God's beauty. And I found that that beauty gave me like an energy. Have you ever seen like something so beautiful that it just like enters your soul, you come alive, you have this energy, and it's just like a big smile on your soul. And that's what happened to me in that 2-hour walk. What about you? Yeah. Have you ever had a pilgrimage?
No, I just think when we were on sabbatical in Ducklington, and we would take walks every single day, and then we would, find ourselves walking through a field to a little church and looking at history and who was there and just that kind of thing. I think getting out of your own kind of thoughts of your own life and actually just releasing yourself to the now and the walk and the grass or the trees or the sky at that time, animals if you're in Africa.
Now, people are wondering, I gave my imaginary
scenario,
battling infertility, moving halfway around the world, kind of losing your identity, having to reinvent yourself. And that's the person that we're going to be interviewing tonight, and that's Sheridan Voysey. And he's written several books, and he's a speaker all over the world as well, just a wonderful guy. And his book that we're going to be discussing tonight is called The Making of Us, Who We Can Become When Life Doesn't Go as Planned. And I don't know about you, but I've been in so many unplanned scenarios, especially when we went on a retreat. You never know what to expect. You don't know who you're going to meet, but every time I've done something out of the ordinary, and I've certainly moved halfway around the world quite a few times, but it really, it's not what you become, it's really who you become. And I think that's the purpose of a pilgrimage, not just to see the holy sites of Jerusalem, but to become different as a result of what you've seen and who you meet. And sometimes it's not the sights of Jerusalem that influenced me. I actually liked the market a lot, and I liked meeting people. So I don't really remember the sights that well. I'm not like a sighty person, but I do remember the people that I met, and I became a different person as a result of those people.
Well, I do remember the feelings that I felt, say if I was in Jerusalem or if I was somewhere in the UK where it just was a special time. Like when we were, when those harpsichordists were playing.
Oh, and what's that, Hexham Abbey?
Yes, in Hexham Abbey, there were 2 harpsichordists playing. And I remember walking in there and listening. What were they playing? I can't remember. They were playing Bach,
like the Goldberg variations.
Something like that. Yeah. And I remember what that made me feel. And I just was so, I don't know, you're caught up in a moment where your spirit and your emotions get all, I don't know, somehow you just feel like you've kind of
Well,
experiencing something so different.
And you were so impressed with them that you bought them lunch. And these poor British people were so embarrassed.
They were very reluctant. And I said, look, you just put on a great performance and I would like to pay for it. But no, Kurt, I think doing a pilgrimage, I mean, for us, I mean, we're going to talk to Sheridan and he's far more qualified than we are. But I think that even if it's like an hour's walk or it's a time where you jump out of your own life and you appreciate the beauty of just being on your own with God, with your thoughts, in a place that's thought-provoking or beautiful, out in nature. I think those are the times. And I think also during these COVID times, you know, I think if you have a garden or if you can look outside a window and you can be deliberate about thinking about things that are good and noble and praiseworthy, and we can give glory to God for them.
Well, that's it. You know, the Bible says, you know, think of things that are good, that are excellent, that are praiseworthy, that are noble. And I think almost you have to fast from these toxic thoughts.
Yes.
So you take a retreat, you know, and you're just thanking God and changing your thinking. And that's what I did yesterday.
Yeah.
And I came back with so much inspiration and energy. It was incredible. In fact, we're going to go to a video right now introducing Sheridan's book, The Making of Us.
Sometimes life doesn't go as planned. Maybe the company folds, or the marriage ends, or the accident happens, or success no longer matters, and we find ourselves asking, who am I, and what am I here for, all over again. But what if closed doors can allow new adventures to begin? What if losing an identity can help us discover who we really are? What if the adversity we face can release our greatest gifts into the world? What if all this could be the making of us?
Well, Sheridan, I just saw that Dan Ellender endorsed your. I like that. So I love Dan Ellender. But anyway, perhaps that was a great. I think I like the questions. The quality of the questions were very evocative and kind of demand a response from us. But yeah, I think that was just a good introduction of whetting your appetite to do something.
I think if anything, just as we just saw those questions and we saw Sheridan walking in that great expanse, I think sometimes we need to be brave enough to be able to say, what is happening in my life right now? What is God saying? What is he doing? And I think that Sheridan's definitely going to help us do that.
Yeah. Well, you know, I don't know if you know the author Paulo Coelho, and you're usually like for or against him. Some people love him, some people think he's a bit kooky, but he has sold over 200 million books. And
he's got something to say.
He is a Catholic, and he always brings Jesus into his life, but in very, very unusual ways. Okay, so it's like if you were talking about Harry Potter or something, you'll get people saying, "Oh, you shouldn't read him. You should read." It's just one of those authors. But you know, he lives here in Spain, in just a little town, and he is a very evocative writer that deals with the hard questions of life. But he was doing a retreat or a pilgrimage, not a retreat, a pilgrimage in Spain it's called the St. James Trail or the Camino de Santiago. And every year,
his wife was responsible for that.
Yeah, I'll tell you, thousands of people, do this every year. And some will walk all the way from the French border, all the way into Portugal, or with the final destination, Santiago de Compostela. And, it's very popular now. But when he first walked it, there were very few people on the road. Very few people knew about it. So I'm going to read something that he wrote, and this is one of my favorite quotes. I love this. And he had no idea what was going to happen to him way back in the 80s, the early 80s, when he first went on the trail. And he says this. He says, "All I know at this very moment is that I am tense and nervous. because I have just realized, this is while he's walking on his pilgrimage, that I can't go back to what I have been doing, even if this means giving up a decent salary at the end of the month, a certain degree of emotional stability, a job that I know well and whose techniques I master. So you can imagine him on this pilgrimage, just wrestling with this. God, should I? God, should I not? It's too risky. You know, most authors fail. You know, and then he goes on. He says, I need to change, follow the direction of my dream, a dream that seems to me childish, ridiculous, and impossible, and which I've never had the courage to realize, to become the writer I have secretly always wanted to be. So you can see on this pilgrimage he's doing it. 20 days just wrestling with the direction that he believes God wants him to take. Then he goes on, do I want to change? I don't think so. Nevertheless, the road is changing me. Do I want to know the mysteries? I think so. But the road is teaching me that there are no mysteries, that as Jesus Christ said, nothing is hidden that has not been revealed. In other words, everything is happening in exactly the opposite way from which I expected. And I think that's true for every kind of pilgrimage or retreat that I've taken. Many times it's better than I expected, to be honest. Not worse. Many times it's better than I expected. And I was kind of looking at road journeys, like the journey of Abraham.
Actually, you know? one of our viewers have written in about
the journey of Paul on the Damascus road, and he certainly didn't expect that. Or what about the journey on the Emmaus road when they were walking with Jesus and they didn't know it was Jesus? So I think there's a great biblical precedent for these, like we call them in America, road trips. Maybe I'll call it not a pilgrimage, but a road trip.
Well, Maureen, you've written in and you've told us here, you said, hi, Kurt and Melanie, God touched me the first time I drove with my son through the mountains of the lakes, was full of praising God non-stop for such beauty, God's creation. From Maureen. Thanks so much for sharing that with us. It's beautiful. And then we have a very different kind of email here, but I am going to read it out. I'm not sure whether it's a joke.
Okay.
This coronavirus is a blessing. My wife doesn't want to travel. She doesn't buy online because it's all Chinese. She doesn't go clothes shopping. She wears a mask all day and keeps her mouth shut. Best thing that ever happened to me, Frank. Frank, I'm sure that's a joke, but we're reading it out. Okay, who else do we have here quickly? Hi, folks. I'm with you, Kurt, on People Before Sights. Thinking back to the first trip to Israel at Passover 2005. Yes, seeing the garden tombs, seeing Galilee and floating in the Dead Sea was great. But my favorite day was the annual march through Jerusalem and shaking hands with all the Jewish people who were cheering along the way. Shalom, Dori. Wow, what a precious, precious memory that is. Gosh, thank you so much.
But I remember a message that we did a while ago. It was called Blown Off Course for a Blessing. And remember when Jesus forced his disciples to get into the boat, and then they had to go to Bethesda. That was their destination. And then a storm came along. Of course, Jesus calmed the storm. But they did not end up in Bethesda. They ended up in Gennesaret. And that's where Jesus did unprecedented miracles. So sometimes in life, we'll have a destination in mind, but then Jesus kind of gets in the boat. You get blown off course, and then every one of us has our Gennesaret. So, but we wanted to go to, Bethesda, but somehow the wind blew us off course. It was completely unexpected. But if you read the text there, that's when Jesus did some of his greatest miracles in that town. So I just really want to encourage people. Sometimes you just got to ride out the storm, and it'll take you to, I think, usually a very beautiful place, or sometimes it can be a very scary place, but we will be transformed as a result.
So if you're a bit controlling and you just want it all to be as you want it to be, then this is your encouragement to just let the Lord do something special and blow you off course for a blessing.
So maybe you've had a retreat or a pilgrimage and you want to share about it, please write in. But back to Sheridan. he was the one that I read. We were battling infertility, moving halfway around the world. And I think everything just caught up with him. And he said, you know what? I want to do a retreat. And I'm just going to read a little bit of his own words here. It says, inspired by the life and influence of the 7th century monk Cuthbert. Now, full stop there. I didn't know who Cuthbert was. I heard of his name, but I started researching him, and he's an incredible figure, so much so that we're going to show a little video about him just now, okay? But Sheridan traveled on foot from the holy island of Lindisfarne to Durham, and we've been to both those places.
And we saw Cuthbert's grave as well.
That's right. Okay, or one of them, or
well, one of them.
Okay. So in The Making of Us, in Sheridan's book, he invites us to join him as he walks along England's shores, and we trace the borders of our own hearts. I love those words. That's what's happened to Paulo Coelho. That's what happened to me yesterday, when you just trace the borders of your own heart and you get the courage and you get the direction, and God will give you the direction. But once you have the direction, it seems like, this is crazy, I can't do it. And then you need to get the inspiration and the power and the courage, don't you? So I love this. So part Pilgrim's journal, part call to reflection. The Making of Us eloquently reminds us of the beauty of journeying into uncertainty. Like especially every walk I've done in the UK with you, Melanie, what's happened? The weather. Remember, we were in Runswick Bay, and then we were going to Stays. Okay, and I think it was like
the trip
hour
there
and a half.
was fine. The trip there was fine.
It was beautiful.
We had a lovely lunch and everything, and then the weather just turned, and I'm going, I don't know.
But being from
this.
Spain, I said, I don't even need to bring a jacket or anything. Look at the sun, it's up. And then we went to the pub, and of course, it's just like, for an American, it's like being in, wow, I mean, this pub and the water coming against the windows, and the fish and chips was so good. And then we finish our meal and we go outside and we walk about a half an hour, and it just starts raining.
We're right on this verge, the sea's down there, and we're right on the top of this verge. And it's quite like blowing.
So what are we saying? If you take a 100-mile pilgrimage in England, dress well. They say there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothes. So the Making of Us eloquently reminds us of the beauty of journeying into uncertainty, the freedom of letting go, and the wonder of losing our identity, only to discover who we really are. And I think Jesus said it, that we have to die to ourselves, in a sense, to discover ourselves, to lose our life, to gain a life.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that. And I think a retreat is where we just let the just leave behind.
Pilgrimage, maybe.
Just throw off everything that hinders and everything that entangles us, and learn to trust God in that journey.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any comments?
Well, all I can do is invite our beautiful viewers to just kind of expand your mind at this time. You're probably sitting there with your hot cup of tea or whatever, thinking, well, I wonder how this really relates to me, going on pilgrimages and all this, and having the boundaries of my heart extended. But I think that's what God wants to do. You may be sitting there, you may never go on a long walk. Maybe you are, you're challenged physically, or you've got some circumstance in your life where it doesn't look probable that you'd be able to go on one of these kind of like pilgrimages in that sense, that Kurt's just been describing. But perhaps there's a moment in time where God will allow you to have a space, in your day where you're reflecting on the Word. Maybe you're looking out at a bird or a beautiful tree outside your window. Sometimes it's in those moments that God wants to just drop something in your spirit. So don't discount. We're kind of going on a journey, and once we get to have a chat with Sheridan, you're going to be very excited with what he has to say.
Okay, so before we chat to Sheridan, he was inspired by 7th century monk, St. Cuthbert, also Holy Island. He went from Holy Island to Durham, which we've been there, and it does have a wonderful mystique about it. I can't undeniably so. But let's find out who this St. Cuthbert was and why he would have such an impact on Sheridan, so we can enjoy interacting with him a little bit more.
Our next saint story begins in the wilds of Northumbria. A young man worked in the hills guarding sheep, keeping them safe from wolves and poachers. One night something amazing happened, and his life changed forever. The young man's name was Cuthbert.
Bede says that even as a young child, Cuthbert seems to have been chosen by God, and there are stories about him praying and performing miracles from a young age. Maybe he always planned to become a monk, but it was what happened up there in the Cheviot Hills that properly convinced him. Cuthbert had been looking after sheep for several summers before it happened. One night, after the other men had gone to sleep, Cuthbert saw a light in the sky. The light got brighter, and then he saw angels, and they were carrying a body up into the sky. Well, the next day, Cuthbert found out that Aidan had died. He knew that the angels had been a vision, and he decided that he would become a monk like Aidan. So he went to a monastery at Melrose to train. Eventually, Cuthbert became the prior of Melrose, and there are many stories about him performing miracles, such as healing the sick. After the Synod of Whitby, Cuthbert came here to Lindisfarne to be the prior of Aidan's monastery, and he helped the monks to accept the changes that the Synod had brought. Cuthbert's reputation as a man of prayer and healing spread far and wide, and many people travelled to the island to ask him to heal them and teach them about God. Other monasteries would also ask Cuthbert to go and stay and teach them too. In spite of all his other work, Cuthbert never lost his commitment to prayer, and he liked to spend lots of time praying. Sometimes he had to take really unusual actions to find time and space to pray. Bede tells a story about Cuthbert praying in the night when the other monks were sleeping. He was staying at a monastery at Coelho. Well, one of the monks followed Cuthbert and saw him go down to the beach and wade out into the sea. He didn't just walk a few feet into the water like I have, because he was much braver than me, and he waded way out until the water came right up to his neck, and he stayed there all night saying his prayers. He must have been freezing. It's cold enough today. And in the morning, in the dawn, he came back out onto the beach to dry himself. He didn't have a towel, not like I have, but amazingly, the young monk who was watching him saw two otters come up out of the water and dry him with their fur and warm him with their breath. Of course, the monk had to confess that he'd been spying, and he had to promise not to tell anybody until after Cuthbert had died. Eventually, Cuthbert realized that he wanted to live by himself and spend his whole life praying and thinking about God without any other distractions. So he decided to become a hermit. The first place that Cuthbert came to live as a hermit was here, on this beautiful little island, which is called St. Cuthbert's Island now. And it's quite close to the main island. In fact, you can walk across when the tide's out like it is now. So pretty soon he decided he wanted to be somewhere even further away. So he moved out to one of the Farne Islands, which are right out there to sea. The island that he chose could only be reached by boat, and so it was much harder for people just to drop in and see him, and he had more time to be by himself. And he built himself a church and a little house and a guest house, and he built them out of stone so big that, according to Bede, it would have taken 4 men to lift them, but he did it all by himself. It wasn't an easy life being a hermit. He had to get used to the idea of being completely alone, but he knew that it was the best way he could serve God. Cuthbert planned to spend the rest of his days on Farne, but it wasn't to be. One day he got a visitor, Egfrith, the king of Northumbria. The king wanted Cuthbert to be the bishop of Northumbria. Cuthbert didn't want to leave his island, but how could he refuse the king? In the end, he said that he would be the Bishop of Lindisfarne. Cuthbert followed Aidan's example as a bishop and travelled far and wide, teaching people about God and continuing to heal the sick. But after a couple of years, he began to realise that he was coming to the end of his life. So he decided to return to his island, to his favourite place. And that's where he died on the 20th of March, 687. He didn't die alone though, because some of the monks from Lindisfarne managed to fight their way through the rough seas in order to be with him at the end. And that should be the end of his story, but there was still so much more to come. I could tell you about Viking invaders and the way that the monks and his followers took his body down to Yorkshire, to Ripon and back up to Durham to look for a safe burial place. I haven't even told you about the Lindisfarne Gospels or the Cuthbert Gospel or the legend of the Dun Cow. I haven't mentioned the miracles that occurred after his death or the way that his body didn't rot. I haven't even told you about what happened when Henry VIII's men opened his coffin 800 years later. These are stories that somebody else will have to tell at another time, so I'm going to leave it to one of his greatest admirers, Bede, to have the last word.
Cuthbert was a great teacher, a monk who cared for others and for the world around him, someone who had the gift of prophecy and healing, a person who could perform miracles, a man of prayer.
Now, after that kind of teaser about the life of Cuthbert, he inspires me. I could understand why Sheridan would be inspired by him and those stories. And, you know, we don't know if all of those stories are true in their entirety, but he certainly did miracles. He certainly caused a stir. And I think we were in the Hexham Abbey, and there was a chair of somebody, and then a chair that he sat in, and then we sat in. And But I want to show you something. And it's just a beautiful part of the world. Melanie and I, earlier this year, was it? We were invited by some good friends of ours to Newcastle, and they live in that area. And they just showed us around everywhere. And they took us to Holy Island, and it was just a beautiful, and we had some great weather as well. Absolutely beautiful. So I'm going to show you a video right now of Holy Island. A lot of you might not know of how to get to Holy Island. We have to time ourselves because the tide goes in and out.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have, I think, a 6-hour window that you can even get to the island or get back from the island. So if you time it wrong, literally, if you go out there, your car will just float away. I've seen that. Like if you go on the internet right now, you'll see some drivers that stupidly tried to race against the tide and didn't make it. So, you know, you'll see the road right in front of you, and then an hour later, it's completely flooded because the tide has come in. So it's a really interesting little island, but you feel kind of isolated when you're out there. And then further out, you have some of the foreign islands, but just a beautiful place. But I want to show you just what this looks like, this tide. Enjoy it. Yeah, so it's unbelievable. I've never kind of seen anything like that. But they do have a race, and I'm just going to show you something if you haven't, had the privilege of being up there. And you've noticed that Cuthbert was the prior of Melrose, Scottish border town. And they have this road. You can do a pilgrimage on it. This is not the one Sheridan did, but it's close to the one that he did. And this is from Melrose to Holy Island. And I think it's about, 100 Ks or something. And there's an ultra marathon, and it's just beautiful, beautiful countryside. So we have a young man jogging along St. Cuthbert's Way, going to Holy Island. And by the way, in this marathon, if you're not fast enough, then you won't make the tide.
Oh,
you have to race against the tide. And so enjoy it. love that. How will your journey end? And you saw him racing against the tide. You know, there's so many metaphors in that, the tide and racing against it. But we just thought, as viewers, we would, if you haven't been there, that we would just show you some of the territory. So when we talk to Sheridan about his pilgrimage, we'll have a better understanding of it. And
so before we go to Sheridan Voysey and this wonderful interview that you've been waiting for, I'll just read a couple of your emails here. Romans 1:20, this is Les, thank you so much. For ever since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through his workmanship, all his creation, the wonderful things he has made, so that they who fail to believe and trust in him are without excuse and without defense. Thanks, Les, for that.
Beautiful.
And who else do we have here? We've got, hello, Kurt and Melanie. It was lovely turning into you guys. When you put worship on, God will meet you in that place. Robert Porter in Birkenhead. Lovely that you're watching with us. Tony, you've written, God bless you. Kurt and Melanie, we love you very much. The both of you are a true joy and a comfort to us. And that's from Tony and Elizabeth Hamilton. Thank you so much. And who have we got here? We have, hi, my wife and I live very near the route of St. Cuthbert's Way.
Wow.
And walk and pray along it nearly every day. A great blessing. And that's Peter and Jackie. Oh, I feel a bit jealous.
I do too. I feel a bit teary.
Good.
We were there for 2 hours and they actually live there. That's wonderful. But we're going to be going to Sheridan Voysey right now. Hey, Sheridan.
Hi, Kurt. Hi, Melanie. Gosh, you've really set us up so well
Yeah.
to feel for everything. I mean, you've got the whole of the United Kingdom and Europe all now wanting to go to this little tiny island called Lindisfarne, and the poor people are going to be overwhelmed with tourism over the next few weeks as a result of everything that you've just said.
Well, I don't know.
I think we'll give our commission to Revelation TV then, right?
So, Sheridan, we just, on behalf of our beautiful viewers, we want to say thank you for taking this time to be with us tonight. I know our viewers are really have been set up to just find out who you are, what's making you buzz, and what this whole thing about your pilgrimage is all about, and then how can that affect them. So we're excited to just welcome you on behalf of our beautiful viewers and say thank you so much again for coming and being with us tonight. So, Kurt, I think you're going to set us off with some questions.
Well, very easy. I mean, the making of us, it's talking about who we can become, and it's not what we become. So give us a little bit of context. I told the viewers, battling with infertility, moving halfway around the world, reinventing yourself, etc. But just fill us in about who you are and what made you decide to go to this particular world on a pilgrimage.
Yeah, well, to cut a very long story short, I mean, that's quite literally there has been another book written that gives you the first part of the answer to your question. And that book is called Resurrection Year. And that book tells the story of my wife and I trying 10 years to have a family. And you name it, we tried almost everything that we felt comfortable doing. We tried special diets. We tried healing prayer numerous times. We tried chiropractic, which to this point in time, I don't know why we tried that, but anyway, we tried that. We tried IVF for the first time in 2006. It didn't work. We went for local adoption in New South Wales. We were still living in Australia at the time, and we did the 8 months assessment. And then we waited for 2 years in addition to that to get that little phone call saying, your little girl, your little boy is ready to pick up. The phone call never came. We then went and did as many rounds as we hoped it would take to get our family. This is now around about 2010. And long story short, after a false positive, can you imagine, we were told, we were pregnant, and then we suddenly discovered we weren't, and everything came crashing down on Christmas Eve of 2010. So again, long story short, Merrin, my wife, got offered a job at Oxford University. We saw that as the new beginning that she needed. Proverbs 13:12 says, hope deferred makes the heart sick. And anybody who has had anything to do with this whole area of not being able to have the family you wanted, maybe it's some of your children that are watching, and you know the heartache and you know the truth of that proverb. What's the second part of the proverb? But a dream fulfilled is a tree of life. And so a secondary dream for Marion was to live and work overseas. And so when the opportunity came to work at one of the world's greatest universities, she took that. We came over. That required me letting go of a lot of good things that were happening for me in Sydney. I was by that stage hosting a national radio show, which itself was a 10-year dream fulfilled. I had speaking engagements at Spurling Parliament House and all sorts of things like that, had publishing opportunities. And I knew that by leaving Australia, that would be putting all of that on hold, if not letting go of it altogether. And indeed, that's what happened when I first came to the UK for the first few years. Publishers were turning me down because nobody knew who I was and they're not going to buy a book from somebody they don't know. BBC weren't returning my phone calls back then, and nobody was asking me to speak at their events. And so I was finding myself asking, the first time in 20 years, who are you, Sheridan, and what are you supposed to do with your life? Now, I originally thought that you could answer those questions and pretty much sail off the answers for the rest of your life. If you prayed hard, if you followed your passions, if you were sensitive to following God where he called you to, you'd have a bit of an idea as to what your identity and calling were. I've since discovered, actually, that those two questions sometimes have to be asked and answered a number of times over our lives. And that was the time when I was asking those questions. And I got talking to somebody who mentioned that the Lindisfarne Gospels, which were created by the monks on Lindisfarne after Cuthbert's death, as a memorial to him, really, that they were coming out of the British Library for the first time in a decade. These are now 1,300 years old, exquisitely designed Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They are so frail, they have to be kept in a vacuum-sealed box. They only come out of the British Library once every 10 or 12 years. They were coming out, and somebody suggested about doing this pilgrimage from Lindisfarne, where they were made, down to Durham, Cuthbert's resting place now. And lo and behold, that's what I ended up doing with a friend of mine named DJ. And the result is then the follow-up book, The Making of Us, which really has ended up connecting with a lot of people from a variety of different backgrounds, with a variety of different experiences, but also asking that question, who am I and what am I doing here? Now that the divorce has happened, now that I've lost my career, now that I haven't had the children, now that I have got the children, but they don't talk to me, all of those kinds of things, that it's been kind of connecting with them as well.
So Paulo Coelho said the road changed him. He also said it was unexpected what happened to him. When you were on that pilgrimage with DJ, what changed? Were there unexpected things? Did God speak to you? What was your dialogue with yourself like when you were on that 100-mile journey?
I think, Kurt, to some degree, a lot of what you've actually shared in the first half hour of the program is very much what a pilgrimage is all about. A pilgrimage has really three aspects. There is the outer journey, the physical journey that you do. There is the historical journey, because there's a lot of history, particularly in this part of the world, as you walk that way. And so we were passing places where Cuthbert prayed. There was an image there that you gave in one of the videos of Cuthbert's cave, and that's where Cuthbert would go and pray. And then there's the inner journey, the journey that happens for you internally. And I can say that there were a whole bunch of those things that happened all the way through those three aspects of our pilgrimage. It took us about 8 or 9 days to do. It's about 116 miles, and I think that's 250 kilometers or so. And right from the beginning, you've been kind of talking about pilgrimage and retreat. Now, often the two go together. A pilgrimage in general, you're moving. A retreat in general, you're stationary. So you might retreat to a place and spend a few days there just to pray and to read scripture and just to be present before God. A pilgrimage, you will be on a journey, generally walking. I combined the two. I actually started with a 3-day retreat on Lindisfarne before then DJ joined me, and then we headed off on our 8 or 9 day pilgrimage. And even in that, you mentioned the tidal nature of Lindisfarne. You can only get on there a few hours a day. Well, by the time I was able to make my way from Oxford all the way up there, which was, a good 6 or 7 hour trip really via train, I wasn't able to get onto the island. And so I stayed on the mainland at a little place called Beale, which is it's a pub, it's a little motel. That's all it is. That is Beale, and some farms around about the place. And readers will find in the first chapter that one of the most significant encounters with God I have is actually in that yellow-walled 80s style motel room that had no atmosphere about it at all, that looked onto the car park with a view of the bins. But that is where God met me in a very powerful way. I pulled off my shoes, I got down on my knees, I started to pray. And after an hour of praying, I still hadn't felt anything, which was kind of rare for me. But my mind was this Indian street of noise and honking and yelling and all these questions that were going on in my mind. Who are you? Where are you going? Is your life washed up? Will you ever be published again? What's going on? And then in the midst of that, about an hour in, I hear these words: just be present.
Wow.
And they were of a completely different nature to my thoughts, because my thoughts were all loud and crazy and anxious. These were peaceful thoughts, quiet thoughts. They had a weightiness about them, and yet they were light.
Wow.
It was the voice of the Spirit. Just be present before me, Sheridan. This is your first calling in life. And, from that moment, I just relaxed. I think I almost slumped on the bed. And that was my first moment along that trip. Now, I would love to say that over the next 8 days, I just had one of those experiences time after time after time. No, in fact, actually, the longer the trip went, the harder it was to hear God's voice, because we were in significant pain. Pilgrimages can actually be very painful experiences. We had blisters, we had sore backs, we were carrying our packs. DJ, my friend, had blisters the size of biscuits on his covered on both feet. So it was hard. But there was another dramatic moment at the end of the pilgrimage, and that's where we finally arrived at Durham Cathedral, and we walked into an evensong service, which we were expecting might have 20 people in it. Anyway, there must have been 400 or 500 people in it. We couldn't get a seat. And as we leant up against some of the walls just to try and take a little bit of weight off our feet, the visiting speaker for the day got up and said, "Some of you this week have been on pilgrimage. Some of you have been following the life of Cuthbert and Aidan and Bede and Hilda." It turned out that we had walked into a one-off service dedicated to the Northern Saints and to pilgrimage. And it was just this lovely moment of serendipity that was an amazing way to wrap up the pilgrimage for me, that basically said, God's got your life under control. When you can't hear his voice, you're still in his hands. Just relax, Sheridan. The answers will come when they're needed.
Wow. I was thinking when you were talking about this, many of our viewers, including myself, when you talk about a pilgrimage of 8 or 9 days, or even 3 days, or even one whole day, people are saying, well, I'm not up to that. And then, Melanie, we were talking to Sheridan about the possibility of mini retreats. And then we went on a very, very, not a retreat, a pilgrimage. We went on a very, very short mini pilgrimage of 2 hours, but it transformed my life. And I did have that incredible experience where I was overwhelmed with beauty. And I play the classical guitar, and suddenly I had just a passion to play the music of Bach, who is a Christian musician. And I just went home and I learned the first cello suite, and it filled me with this incredible energy. So how can we, people's pastors might say you should have your quiet time, and people have their quiet time, but how could we incorporate mini pilgrimages in our life if we're in our 70s or 60s or
80s
whatever, or 80s or 90s or 100s?
A lot of our viewers, are at that age. And perhaps it's just something that they've never thought of, or it's been out of reach. how would you suggest they do a mini pilgrimage?
Pilgrimage is first and foremost a state of the heart. What is the difference between a tourist and a pilgrim? I mean, in some cases, they go to the very same places. In some cases, they walk the same amount of distance.
This is great.
But a pilgrim has their mind and their heart focused on God as they walk. The tourist is there to take photos. In fact, again, the first chapter of The Making of Us, when you get to read that, and I hope you're able to get to read that, you'll find that actually my first day of retreat on Lindisfarne, I was so keen, because I'm an amateur photographer, I was so keen to run and take photos of everything. And I got some great shots, I'll tell you now. But I got back to my room and I thought, something's been missed. I'd slipped into tourism mode and I wasn't a pilgrim in that moment. And so I decided the next 2 days, okay, I'm going to put the camera away and I'm just going to be present with God. So here are some tips if you'd like to do a little mini pilgrimage. And you're right, it doesn't take anything more. You could do one within half an hour or an hour if you like, because it's a state of the heart. So here's some suggestions. What I have found helpful is to plan a route. And you say, okay, well, for me, I'll give you an example. So from Oxford to a town a little bit south of here called Abingdon, it was about 12 miles. Now, again, you might not be up for that, but just for illustration's sake. So that was going to take me around about 2.5 hours to walk. And then I could either walk it back or I could take the bus back. And I took the bus back in this particular situation. But you plan out a route, and it might just be a beautiful spot that is not far away from you. You plan it out. You're going to go somewhere. Start off perhaps reading a scripture, reading a psalm to get you into that place of being with God as you walk, before you walk. You might also find it really helpful, as I do, to journal down everything that's going on in your mind and heart at that point as well, because it can kind of get it out of the mind, get it off the heart, get it onto the paper, and leave you free then to walk with God and not be distracted by all the things that are going on with the children and with the career or whatever it is that's going on in your life at this particular moment. Write it down, put it aside. Then set out. Slow your pace. I'm naturally a fast walker. I'm tall, I'm 6'3". I naturally walk quickly. I have to consciously slow my pace. Maybe you already walk at a fairly kind of moderate pace anyway. Great. Feel your feet touching the ground. Be open to your senses. Feel the air. Feel the temperature. Listen for the birds. Listen for what is going on around you. And then simply say, Lord, speak to me through this. We already had somebody who emailed in Romans 1:20. Ever since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his divine nature and his power have been seen by what has been made. So there is something in which God is not creation. We believe in creation and God being separate beings, separate entities. But God is reflected in his creation. What did Jesus say? He said, when you're worried and anxious about things, consider the lilies of the field. Go and look at the birds and see how they're provided for all the time. He's actually giving us tools to do this. In fact, some research only about 9 months or so ago came out of the United Kingdom that found that those who spend between 2 minutes and 10 minutes a day contemplating nature have greater levels of well-being, lower levels of anxiety, and a greater sense of wanting to help others. Now, I would say that's because they're seeing an echo of God's goodness in the creation around them. So become present to that. Focus on that. You might want to stop, sit down, look at a flower for 3 minutes. Just meditate on it, contemplate it, and just say, Lord, thank you. So it can either be gratitude that you bring into this. You might ask God to speak to you through some aspect of creation. Maybe you want to keep on journaling, write down what you did. When I did this mini pilgrimage down to Abingdon, I did stop at a couple of times and I pulled out my journal and I wrote down some things. Now, that wasn't a pilgrimage where I had some great epiphanies. It was just a time to be with God, and it was refreshing, and it was enjoyable, and it somehow calibrates your life. Now, why don't you think about then doing that with your walk to get the paper or something? Choose a quiet route if you can. Try and get away from the highway.
Yep.
I'm sure that God can speak through the highways, but try and get away on a quieter route because that seems to give you a little bit more
Sheridan,
space.
thank you so
This
much.
is so practical.
This has been so practical, and I know that our viewers have actually clocked into what you said, because it's just absolutely available for everybody to do. Just being present with the Lord, even looking at a blade of glass, a grass.
Okay, we have our time is going by. Book. How can we get hold of your book?
Well, thank you. So it's available at themakingofus.com. Themakingofus.com. You can get it from any bookstore, so you can order it from your local Christian bookstore or even your local mainstream bookstore. But themakingofus.com, this is what it looks like. Here it is. I love the cover. I think the designers have done a really wonderful job on the cover. Yes, it's
beautiful with the boots there. So Sheridan, I'm going to wrap this up really quickly. We have loved having you on. We could have had you for another hour.
Another 2 hours.
Thank you so much for being with us. Our viewers are also saying thank you as well. It's been a real treat, and hopefully they'll get your book and be able to catch up on a lot more of what you have to say. So God bless you. May you have lots of sales on your book, and may your life really do the impact that you have purposed it to be and God's purposed it to be. And we'll speak soon, hopefully. Kurt.
Okay, Sheridan, thank you so much. I
Bye-bye,
really
Sheridan.
appreciate
God
that.
bless you. Thanks so much.
Treat. Bye.
Wow, that was just amazing.
Wow, I kind of teared up because.
Do we have time for that last little thing? Or we don't.
No, we don't have
good.
time to show it, but that's another program. But Melanie, what struck me is people will tell you about how they have a quiet time, but this is the first time in my life as a Christian where I heard something like this.
Yes.
And I suddenly remembered who did it, and it was George Mueller. And for 35 years of his life, George Mueller never failed to find joy in God on a daily basis, and he did it while he was walking.
Yeah.
And he first started by shutting himself in, trying to pray, and it failed.
Yes.
And so he just walked out. Any emails?
Well, Cynthia, thank you. You've written in and you've said here, many years ago, my late husband and I went to St. Michael's Mount in Cornwall, and you have to wait for the tide to recede to walk across. It was a monastery from the 8th to the 11th century. Thank you for that. That must have been absolutely beautiful. And then, so I want to just say that as we are just wrapping up, and I want to say goodbye to you right now, we want to just challenge you that in these times of stress and anxiety, that you do take your time to be present with the Lord. Look out the window if you can't get out. Look at a bird, look at a tree, look at the sun, and just find that place where you can concentrate on what God wants to say to you. Kurt.
Consider the lilies and the birds and the stars in the sky. Read God's second book to us, nature. Enjoy it. Be refreshed on your pilgrimage, and we'll see you next week. God bless you all. Bye.